Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about the complete story of Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain miniseries, written by Tini Howard. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. So with that said, welcome to issue 1 of the Betsy Braddock newest comic. Now just to provide you a small recap of Captain Britain's story after the events of Excalibur and Knights of X. We have her story ending with Betsy choosing to stay behind for months to defend Otherworld from the anti-mutant crusader Merlin. But after that was done, Betsy Braddock left the provinces to govern themselves, divorcing the role of Captain Britain from its traditional place by the side of the omniversal Magistrix. So because of that, she stayed as the defender of Otherworld to protect them from all outside threats, basically replacing the Starlight Citadel and watching over all the universes that connect to Otherworld, which includes defending the multiverse too. So with that said, she was also able to make a few allies along the way, which includes the Captain Britain Corps, Pete Wisdom as the leader of Strike, Captain Avalon, and his powerful fairy wife Megan Braddock. But with Britain itself not too keen on Betsy as its captain, she's got a long road ahead. So with that out the way, this issue opens with Betsy having a conversation on the news station. And let's just say that this conversation was looking more like an inquisition than anything else. Because like I stated earlier, the British people weren't too keen on Betsy being their newest captain. In fact, they were actually questioning why she even has the title to begin with. Mainly because of the fact that she is a mutant. Because as we all know, their country was one of the nations that didn't accept Krakoa as a country. Which is ironic because the person who was debating with her was a mutant himself that went by the name Micromax. And much like the moderator, he was dead set on bringing her down. So after wave upon wave of demoralizing questions, our captain receives a psychic message from out in the multiverse calling for help, which made her cut this interview short. And the person in question that needed help wasn't really a person in the traditional sense. Because the call for help came from Earth 99476 from Britannica Rex, which so happened to be a planet made up of dinosaurs. And unfortunately, our dinosaur Captain Britain is in grave danger because her world is currently facing an issue that was long foreseen to happen in their future. Britannica Rex spoke of the day when fire would rain down from the heavens and destroy their world, when their planet would be bombarded by meteors. And unfortunately for her, that day is today. But when you're a member of the Captain Britain Corps, help is never too far away. Because out of the sky we see Betsy Braddock and Rachel Summers ascend from the sky. So with help on the scene, the two captains immediately made their way to an impact crater as Rachel helped escort the many dinosaur tribes to safety. But once our two Betsys made it to the impact site, they were shocked by what they found. Because in the crater was a Fury. And strangely enough, this Fury was much smaller than the ones they faced in Otherworld. But just because it was smaller didn't mean it wasn't as deadly. Because as soon as Britannica Rex got close to it, the Fury sprung into action. And just like that, the battle was on. So while they were fighting the Fury, the two Betsis was trying to figure out the purpose of this invasion, because Britannica stated that her world is not one of technology, so the Fury really should have no purpose here. And that's when our Betsy let her know that their whole purpose is to attack those with superpowers and to kill members of the Captain Britain Corps. So as the fight wages on, Betsy states that they would need a lot of power in order to bring this Fury down, which was exactly what they had, because from up above came Rachel Summers, and she was primed and ready to put in some work. So using some power from the Phoenix Force, Rachel launches a ball of fire into the tar pit surrounding the Fury, causing it to go up in flames. And just like that, the battle was over for now, because afterward we transition over to the Braddock's base of operations, where we see Betsy, Rachel, and Brian having a conversation about the events that just transpired. Because once everything was said and done, the team started to do intense research on the Furies. And from what they could gather, they discovered that the Furies, while under Merlin's rule, chose to enlarge themselves to resemble Sentinels. But once they did that, they ended up growing weaker in the process. So due to the fact that this one was in its original form, made it much more powerful than when they faced them back in Otherworld. In fact, Rachel points out that she even tried to do chronoskimming to track down the Fury's origins, only to discover that they aren't even from Earth 238 like the ones they faced before. So while they was continuing on with their conversation, it was mysteriously interrupted by a massive shake of their house. Because outside of the house, Jamie Braddock was transporting the home in his hands as he went skipping along the Braddock Isle off the coast of England. Until he ran into some not so happy British soldiers with their guns drawn. But little did they know that Jamie was more than they bargained for. Because in a split second, Jamie tossed the home in their direction. And in a blink of an eye, the Braddock home grew to its original size. And just like that, Jamie was able to return his entire family to their home of origins. But unlike the rest of the family, Betsy and Rachel still had some work to do. Because as their house was starting to be surrounded by cameras, the two women made their way into the courtyard where they shared a passionate kiss before teleporting to Otherworld to meet with the Fury King. So while all that is going on, we skip over to Micromax having a conversation with someone, and by the looks of it, he is currently in the hot seat. Because the person he is speaking to is none other than Morgan Le Fay. And as we know, she has no love for the witch breed, or better known as mutants. But by the time Micromax realized it, it was already too late. Because his escape was cut short when Morgan scooped him up. Because this whole situation was orchestrated by Morgan Le Fay the whole time. Everything that happened from the interview to all the hate the Braddocks were receiving was because of her. Because her ultimate goal was to make Britain in her own image. But in order to do that, she must first crown her own Captain Britain, a Captain Britain who wears the Union Jack and smiles for the cameras, a Captain Britain that makes people happy, a Captain Britain that is easy to control. And with those ominous words, we transfer over to Infuri, or better known as the land of the Everforge and the homeworld of the Furies. And when we get to this cold mechanical world, we see Betsy Braddock and Rachel approach a throne where the Lord of all Furies sat waiting. Now this is a very important moment for both sides because this is the very first time they spoke since the Furies sided with Merlin during the war. And with Betsy being who she is, she made it a point to ask the Forge Master Federal if he had anything to say about that. In which he responds by making light of it by saying, no, because Merlin lost the war. Which solicited laughter from his people. Now, with Betsy trying to be diplomatic about the situation, she chose to ignore the insult and bring up the purpose of her being there. Which was because of the fury they fought earlier. But once again, the king continued to insult her by saying that it sounded like Captain Britain lost a battle and learned a lesson. Now this pissed Betsy off, because she shot back by saying, you have made it clear that you are not my charges and you don't want my protection, which means you can easily become my enemies. So while all that chaos is going on, we skip away from the throne room and see Rachel sneaking around gathering information. And while she is doing that, we could hear the verbal battle between Betsy and the Forge Master play out. Because the Forge Master states that those Furies didn't act on his orders. But just because he didn't order it doesn't mean he is against it. Because he encourages his people to fight, and if Captain Britain wants to waste her time by tracking them down, then she is more than welcome to try. But as soon as he states that Rachel gets discovered by the Furies. But not before Rachel comes across a giant Union Jack hanging in the forge. So with tensions high, Betsy rushes to Rachel's side and said, if anyone lays a single finger on her, then that would be seen as an act of war. Which was all she needed to say to buy them enough time to escape. Because the Forge Master ordered his Furies to stand down, because it wasn't worth a war against Krakoa, and on top of that they had their own orders to follow. So while that is going on, we jump over to the Isles, and when we get there, we see Pete Wisdom, the leader of Strike, paying a visit to the Braddocks. Now at first, he just sat down with Brian and had a regular conversation while drinking tea. Until our two heroes returned from the forge. Because once they arrived, she wasted no time and immediately got down to business. Betsy filled Pete in on everything that went down, including the collaboration between the Furies and Earth 616 English government. But despite all that information, she still needed Strike to fill in some information for her. Which led her to ask Pete to look into the Coven, because she suspected them to be the ones dealing directly with the Forge. So being a good ally, Pete agrees to Betsy's favor, but under the stipulations that he could start working on it tomorrow, due to the fact that they all were tired. So following that, we transition to later that night where Betsy and Rachel was preparing for bed while having a full conversation about the events that just transpired. Talking about things like future plans and logistics on how to gather additional information. Until Rachel suggests that maybe just for tonight they could focus on each other and deal with everything in the morning. So as the two push all their complaints to the back of their head, they then turn their attention to the then and now. So skipping over to the following morning, we pick up with Pete meeting with his team at a local cafe. And some of the main takeaways from their meeting were that Kevin Mulhern, aka Dr. Destiny, is among their roster, and more importantly, they have also been keeping Excalibur under their care to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. Which includes the British government, which is currently working with the Forge and the Coven. So with that said, we jump over to just that, the Coven, which is being led by Morgan Le Fay. And when we see her, she is spying on another member of the Captain Britain Corps as she is being attacked by a Fury. And while she is looking on, she makes note of saying that she is looking for members of the Corps that can be easily brought to heel or easily turned against their sisters. But see, this attack didn't go unnoticed by our Betsy. Because in the dead of sleep, she awoke and sprung into action, as her and Rachel once again arrived on the scene. But when they get there, they are shocked to discover that the Fury that is attacking this world is here to offer Captain Brittany a chance to join their side, by saying, in exchange of her services, they will spare her world, and that she will no longer have to serve under a false Captain Britain, which Captain Brittany quickly turns down the offer and begun to laugh in its face. But unfortunately, the Furies don't take rejection easily, because within moments several more Furies arrived on the battlefield. So with the odds stacked against them, Rachel let out a ball of energy that quickly faded away as she went crashing to the ground. But see, that little blast of energy was all she needed to summon the full might of the Captain Britain Corps, because several members arrive in all their glory and quickly lay waste to the few Furies on the scene, only to be once again met by additional reinforcements, but this time Morgan was among them. So as she exits the portal, she lets Betsy know that it was convenient for her to summon most of her forces in one area, so she could deal with them all at once. And that wasn't all, because she also revealed that not all Betses should be trusted, as we see a former member of the Corps walking out from the shadows. So with that said, issue number 1 of Betsy Braddock comes to an end, which transitions us to issue number 2. So with that said, this issue opens on Earth 5411 in midst of a battle between the Corps and the Furies. And personally, by the looks of it, the Furies have the Corps against the ropes, as their sheer numbers alone threaten to separate the team, basically using a divide-and-conquer approach. So in an attempt to push back their advancement, Rachel Summers suggests copying their enemies' patterns by swarming one at a time and varying their attacks along the way. So with that said, several members of the Corps launched a joint attack that completely destroyed one Fury. So with one down, the team had a lot more to go. Until in a strange turn of events, Morgan ordered a full retreat of the Furies, which was really odd. So almost instantly Betsy picked up on something being off about the withdrawal, as she and her Corps took pursuit. But due to Morgan's head start, the chase proved fruitless as they managed to escape. So with the battle over, for now, Betsy sat and contemplated what Morgan's next moves could be, because the whole point of this attack was to turn members of the Corps against her. But most of the members are currently at her side, which means it was pointless for her to retreat unless she was looking for something else. But no matter how much she thought about it, nothing came to mind. Until once again Rachel points out the obvious, by saying maybe she's looking for a world with a Betsy that hadn't heard of the drama unfolding yet. Which was right on the money, because Betsy states that Rachel was exactly right. Because if Morgan can't find a member in the existing Corps who would turn against her, then she would have to find one she can make. So with that realization, Betsy asks Rachel to search the multiverse for a Betsy Braddock who is not only untested but who might have some power in the Britain of her world. Which in no time at all, Rachel was able to narrow it down to one potential candidate by the name of Lizzie Braddock of Earth 76. Because according to Rachel, Lizzie Braddock is a powerful secret agent who works for Strike. And as for powers, she's telekinetic rather than being telepathic. So with that established, we transition over to Earth 76, where we see Lizzie searching through her refrigerator, looking for food, until she is met by an uninvited guest. So in a show of power, she lifts several kitchen items and launches them at the intruder. But to her shock, the intruder was able to stop it dead in its tracks, because Morgan was on the scene. And just as Betsy and Rachel assumed, Morgan extended an offer to Lizzie. The offer of power. Now in Lizzie's world, her brother is still Captain Britain, and the only time she ever heard of Morgan being real was when he would drink after missions. So as Morgan continues on her pitch toward Lizzie, Betsy and Rachel appear outside her window. So with everyone on the scene at the same time, Morgan initiates the fight by casting a massive blast out the window toward our heroes. As she exited the apartment saying, she doesn't usually engage in these sorts of fights herself, but it's been a hard day, so she deserves a treat. And just like that, Morgan divided into 3 different people. Because Morgan is able to embody the goddess in triplicate, creating the maiden warrior, the beautiful sorceress, and finally the wise witch. And just like that, the battle was on, as Betsy rushes and clashes blades with the maiden warrior, while Rachel engages the wise witch in mental combat. So with our two heroes preoccupied, the beautiful sorceress gets struck by Lizzie with an iron pan, which was a smart play because those with fairy blood have a weakness towards iron. So with Morgan pissed off, she dashes toward Lizzie and strikes her directly in her chest, knocking her unconscious. But before Morgan can take Lizzie and escape, a shield nails her in the back. For Captain Carter arrives on the scene, but before she could take Morgan in for interrogation, the sorceress casts a spell allowing her to escape. So with the battle over, Betsy and Rachel accompanied Captain Carter to the strike of this universe HQ, because after Morgan's last attack, Lizzie was left in rough shape. So as the team rushes to the HQ, we skip over to London, Coven HQ, where we see Ruben and the Coven helping Morgan teleport to their location. And when she gets there, she is in no mood to talk to Ruben as she makes a beeline to where she is keeping Micromax. Once in hand, Ruben was able to catch up to Morgan and convey a message from the Furies. Because the Furies are not happy with the recent retreat, for they are a war culture, and if they aren't given a war, then they will find a war with Morgan. But despite this news, Morgan couldn't care less about their wishes because her sole focus is on finding her own Betsy. Because she tried the straightforward way and allowed a Betsy to make a choice and only got turned down. But according to Morgan, all hope isn't lost, for she was able to find another who could become Captain Britain in this universe. So following that, we skip over to Strike HQ, where we see Betsy and Captain Carter looking over a beaten Lizzie. Because after Morgan's assault, Lizzie was left with little brain activity and bedridden, which gave Captain Carter an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about Betsy, which Betsy fills her in with no problem, telling her about her role and why she is there to begin with. So with Peggy all caught up, Betsy suggests her to take a nap while she looks over Lizzie, which she does without protest. So, shortly after going to sleep, she is awakened by an alarm. So with Carter being a hero, she follows the sound of chaos to Betsy's room, where she is met by a chaotic scene. So as Betsy lay dying, she offers her power to Peggy, stating that there must always be a Captain Britain. So with no time to lose, she accepts the offer. But little did she know this whole thing was a trap set up by Morgan from the start. Because Morgan was trying to manipulate Captain Carter into killing Betsy for her, which was going according to plan, because a controlled Carter attacked Betsy with no remorse. So as the fight wages on, the two heroes are equally matched, with the exception of one having a killing intent. And to make things worse, Rachel has to take her time in erasing Morgan's influence, because if she rushes it, it can shatter Peggy's mind. So while Rachel works on beating back Morgan's control, Betsy is focused on buying time. And in a joint effort, both Betsy and Rachel delivered a finishing blow on Morgan's enchantment at the same time, which set the captain free. So with Morgan once again pushed back, Peggy is ashamed of her actions. But to her credit, not many people can repel a magical attack, especially from someone as powerful as Morgan. So with the team resting for their next encounter with the Mad Witch, we skip over to the sorceress cooking up her next plan. For on the final page we see Morgan honoring her deal with the Furies, as she names them her new Captain Britain Corps before going out to war. So with that said, this issue comes to an end. So with that said, issue number 2 of Betsy Braddock comes to an end, which transitions us to issue number 3. So with that said, this issue begins with Betsy looking after her niece at the Braddock residence, while her brother Brian and his wife get ready for a night out at a musical. Now, Brian proposes that Betsy bring Rachel along, in order to socialize with the people of Britain, but of course, Betsy declines the offer, citing that they are preoccupied with locating Morgan, for ever since the battle on Earth 76, Morgan just disappeared. So with time on her hands, she takes her niece, as her brother and his wife went out on their date. As Betsy headed towards the basement, she was taken aback to find Rachel chronoskimming with a focused expression, for it seemed like Rachel had been lost in thought for hours, exploring the multiverse, looking for Morgan. So with a swift mental connection, Betsy was able to bring Rachel out of her scanning. And after Rachel's recovery, Betsy visited the Mothermind to inquire about any progress in their search. But unfortunately, all leads proved unfruitful, prompting Betsy to contact her core members, who had no luck spotting their target. Now overwhelmed with stress, Rachel comforted Betsy with a passionate kiss to ease her mind. But unfortunately, that moment was cut short as a call appeared on the screen before them, for Brian and his wife were engaged in a fierce battle with a Fury, and by the looks of it, they were clearly outclassed. So in a race against the clock, Betsy quickly instructed Rachel to stay with her niece while she rushed off to assist her brother in the fight. Moving on, we find ourselves on the battlefield where Fury, painted in the iconic colors of Captain Britain, appears to be on a mission to track down Betsy Braddock. This page also provides some background information about the Furies. The narrator explains that Jim Jasper originally created the Furies to locate individuals with superpowers. When they ventured into Otherworld, they discovered that there were more scattered across the multiverse. Eventually, the Furies united and established their own nation called the Everforge, where 3 laws were put in place. These laws were to hunt down those with superpowers, protect the Forge, and never cease their pursuit. So with that said, returning to the story, Brian and Megan were both working hard to fend off the powerful Fury, but as the pressure increased, Megan made a decision to put an end to the Fury's hunt for both her family and her husband. With a determined expression on his face, Brian crouched down and waited for the Fury to come within range, so with lightning-fast reflexes, he struck his target and the battle began. As Brian approached the Fury, he made it clear that no amount of paint could turn it into a real Captain Britain. However, with many civilians in the vicinity, Brian informed Megan that he would attempt to lure the Fury out of the city, which Megan was not happy about, for she wanted to stay by Brian's side in battle. In a sudden turn of events, the Fury caught Brian by surprise and dealt a fatal blow, seemingly killing Captain Avalon. So with her love dead, Megan was left heartbroken as she cried for her beloved. However, to her astonishment, Brian emerged from the rubble unharmed, for Betsy had used her psychic powers to deceive the Fury into thinking it had succeeded in its mission. So, after the battle was over, the 3 of them strolled through the rubble discussing the recent events. And after a brief conversation, Megan hurried off to see her daughter while Brian stayed behind to speak with his sister. He wanted her to know that he would be there for her if she ever needed assistance. However, Betsy was too consumed with her work and replied that she was fine, and if she needed help, it would be from someone more knowledgeable on the subject. So as the night began to fall, Rachel emerged from a Krakoan gate and headed to the tea shop in London, and upon arrival, she witnessed Fiza healing those injured in the battle. So once Fiza was done, Rachel inquired about Betsy's whereabouts, and Fiza informed her that she was meditating alone in a booth trying to recover from the strenuous hours of carrying wounded people. So with that information in hand, Rachel found Betsy exhausted and asked her how she was feeling. Despite being a psychic, Rachel respected Betsy's privacy and did not intrude on her thoughts. So with that said, Betsy expressed her doubts about leaving Saturnine's side, as she possessed the power to monitor the multiverse more efficiently than they could. So with that news, Rachel became envious and stated that she believed that Saturnine was untrustworthy and had a history of using her Captain Britons for personal gain, much like how she used Brian in the past. Now with this conversation going nowhere, Betsy got up and walked away from the table, leaving Rachel behind, as she met up with the members of Strike to see what help they can provide with the Coven and Morgan. So while all that is going on, the scene shifts to the Coven where Fury had the ambassador pinned by the neck, for the Fury considered the ambassador useless and wanted to use him as a scapegoat for their past crimes. So with that said, Morgan interrupted him and expressed regret that the ambassador wasn't a mutant, because if he was witch breed, she could have added him to her collection. So as the Fury held the man in the air, Morgan asked about the mission to kill Brian, which the Fury confirmed that it was completed, but Morgan pointed out that the Fury was no smarter than the previous captain. For she revealed a mirror reflecting a clear image of Brian playing with his daughter, proving that the mission failed. Now, upon seeing Brian alive and well, the Fury reverted to his 3 fundamental laws as he charged toward the mirror with the intention of correcting his mistakes. However, Morgan used her magic to halt his progress with a simple flick of her wrist as she observed the situation, and said Betsy has something none of the Furies in Everforge has, and that is the Starlight Sword, for when Saturnine made it she empowered it with the Starlight Citadel. And the reason why she did it was because she was trying to save her own hide while retreating from a losing war, but what she didn't expect was she'd lose the Braddock's loyalty. So with that said, she decided to empower the Fury with her magic in order to match Betsy's Starlight Sword, for she states that would be all they would need to win. So with this plan in mind, Morgan shifted her focus to the ambassador, who was still making idle threats about his people coming to find him if he was harmed. Despite his warnings, Morgan remained unfazed and shared a vision of her intentions with him, leaving him petrified. So with the comic coming to an end, we see Betsy getting all dressed up as Rachel enters the room to apologize, but before she could, Betsy interrupts her and states that they don't need Saturnine's help, because Rachel is better than her in every way as she gave her a kiss. So with the air clear between the two women, Rachel then goes on to ask about the dress, which Betsy fills her in psychically about its purpose. So with the plan shared, Rachel walks Betsy to the gate as she travels to her information-gathering mission. For on the last page, we see two important events playing out. A. Betsy is meeting with Tony Stark to ask for the Avengers' help, and B. Morgan is meeting with Dr. Doom to retrieve something that belongs to her. So with that said, issue number 3 of Betsy Braddock comes to an end, which transitions us to issue number 4. Continuing from the previous issue, we find ourselves in the midst of a friendly sword fight between Tony Stark and Betsy. With effortless skill, Betsy gains the upper hand and emerges victorious. So with that out of the way, the two got down to the real reason for her visit, which was to ask for his help against the Furies. For under Morgan's command, the Furies were assigned to hunt and eliminate all mutants in England, which was something Betsy couldn't allow to happen. So with Tony caught up to speed, he states that the Avengers are willing to help in any way, including helping to get all the mutants from the country, but see, that wasn't Betsy's goal, for she refuses to be the Captain Britain that led her people from their homeland. So as she turns and starts to walk away, she lets Tony know that the Fury believes that Brian, her brother, is dead, which could buy them enough time for the Avengers to draw the Fury into battle as a form of bait. Now there are 3 reasons why she chose them for this mission. A. Her brother Jamie is powerful but too unpredictable. B. Given all the anti-mutant sentiment in the UK, the X-Men would be seen as negative. And C. It would help her optics to be fighting alongside the Avengers. So with Tony in complete agreement, we transition over to Rachel having a conversation with her third eye. For Rachel possesses the title of Ascani, and because of that she is a part of a bigger prophecy, a prophecy that has something to do with the sacred timeline. Now the sacred timeline is not a single line, it's not a single tree to be pruned through time travel. But it's a library of lives, where every existence in every form brings knowledge to us, but at the end of the day there is only one Rachel to protect it. So with that stated, we jump forward to the Braddock family preparing for a public event, an event that is designed to improve their appearance, which so happened to be their first red carpet appearance in years. So after doing the walk and taking a few pictures, both Rachel and Betsy sneak out the back door and towards the incoming battle. For on the next page, we see a Fury tracking Captain Avalon and coming in hot, ready to deal out damage, but right before it could strike, a shield comes out of nowhere hitting it dead on. And before it could react, hands, claws, hammers, and magic grip the machine and begin to pull in all directions. For the Avengers alongside Captain Britain is on the scene. And with great effort they manage to rip it into pieces, leaving the parts completely dismantled on the ground below. So with the Fury out of commission, Betsy extended her gratitude towards the Avengers. And then went on to tell them that if they are lucky the Fury would believe that Brian was the sole person responsible for taking it out, because of the speed in which they attacked. So with the battle over and the day 1, Jamie arrives through a portal and retrieves the remains of the Fury to take it to a secure pocket dimension he created while the Avengers go about their business. So once the Earth's mightiest heroes were a safe distance away, Jamie took out a miniature castle and tossed it into the distance, and just like that the castle grew into a full-size fortress. A fortress that belonged to Morgan. So with Doom and Morgan exiting the palace, Betsy summoned her power and anger and slammed her older brother into a wall, demanding him to answer what he was up to. But all Jamie could say was that he owed her for allowing her to be experimented on back when he was king. Now with the deed done, Doom lets it be known that he has no interest in personal conflicts with Betsy. So if she moves against Morgan, then she would also be moving on Latveria, which is something he could not allow to happen, for he doesn't make this promise as Doom the person, but he makes it as a head of a nation. Because from his perspective, it is about the land itself and the sake of the sorcery of their world, and because of that Morgan must stand in Britain and Doom will protect her with all of Latveria. So with nothing left to be done about the issue, Betsy grabs her brother, Jamie, and escapes with Rachel to fight another day. So with that said, we pick up at the Braddock house, where the whole family is laying into Jamie about his carelessness and stupid actions. But no matter how much they scream and condemn their brother, nothing could change the fact that Morgan is now located in Britain with Doom at her side. Because with his involvement, things just got way more complicated, because any move they make could be seen as an act of war, which includes using the Avengers to rain down hell from above. So with a frontal attack off the table, Betsy comes up with a risky plan. First, they will need to focus on saying the people for Morgan, and second, they will need to attack Morgan's forces from within. So with the plan thought out, we skip over to Jamie's pocket dimension with Brian meeting with the captive Fury, for the Mother Mold computer tried to tell him that the Fury from Earth 238 had lost his identity in Morgan's new kingdom. So with that said, issue number 4 of Betsy Braddock's Captain Britain comes to an end. So with issue number 4 coming to an end, we transfer over to issue number 5 of Betsy Braddock Captain Britain. So with that said, this issue opens up with Betsy at the manor, meeting with members of Strike. But more importantly, Betsy is meeting with Fiza, the current wielder of Excalibur, which is the most sacred artifact of Britain. Now for those who don't know, Excalibur is seen as the spirit of Britain, and given the fact it only responds to Fiza is a big deal. So with Fiza at Betsy's side, she then turns to the rest of the team, for the topic of discussion is how they will break into Morgan's castle. And with the help of some aerial drone footage, all the pieces fell right into place. Because on that footage, the team was able to make out a greenhouse attached to the castle that contained all the Blight's wool poison. Now this is important because that greenhouse wasn't originally a part of the manor, which means the magic guarding it is much weaker than the rest. So with that said, that greenhouse would be exactly where they will have to enter. So before they set off, Betsy let her team know that Morgan used people until they're not useful to her anymore, and that would be her blind spot, her Achilles heel. Because once Morgan is inside her villa, she would be far away from Ruben Brousseau and most of the Coven. And as for Doom, he isn't actually staying with Morgan. In fact, he actually returned back to Latveria, which means, on paper, Morgan should be almost alone. So with that out there, the team must strike quickly and get out before anyone notices, because if the cops find out, they will be arrested. And more importantly, if Doom finds out, then things will get completely complicated. So following that, we jump over to Jamie Braddock's pocket dimension, with Brian Braddock, Captain Avalon, dealing with the captive Fury. And let's just say, he was beating the heck out of it. So with the machine lying defeated, Captain Avalon was moments away from sealing the deal before Rachel arrived. Now Rachel tells Brian that she needs this Fury alive for what's to come next. Now in all transparency, she doesn't know what's going to happen or when, but she knows where she needs to be. For the sacred timeline needs her to bring the Fury somewhere. So with Rachel doing as the timeline commands, Brian reluctantly agrees to go with her. So with everyone including Megan ready for battle, we transitioned over to the action. And once we got there, we learned that Tom's job was to scan for any acolytes as soon as he entered the castle, because they wager they'll have some psychic cloaking on. And once he finds them, his job is to relay their location, so the team can take them out one at a time, systematically, until they are all defeated. And as for Kevin, his job was to handle Micromax, because according to Allison he's being kept in a jar. And as for Pete, he was assigned to stay with Allison, because it was best for him to stay with a psionic person. And finally, Allison's job was to look out for Morgan, which was why Pete was with her, because if she ran into her, Pete was there to help. So with that said, ironically both Pete and Allison stumbled upon 3 Covenant members, and before they knew it, the fight was on. Pete quickly took out the first man with a firebase attack and then dealt with the second one, hand to hand. And after disarming him, Pete then turned his attention to the third man, but this one was wearing a Blight's wool ring, which did little to nothing to help his odds against Pete, because using the second man's weapon, Pete dropped him all the same. Now on a side note, Allison was using her powers to cover up the noise, so alarms wouldn't be raised. But anyway, following that we jump over to Betsy and Rachel flying over the castle. And Betsy is telling Strike to hurry up and settle down before Morgan catches on, because they need a little bit of time. So with Betsy's warning delivered, Rachel tells her love that it is time for her to leave with Brian and Megan to accomplish her goals, and hopefully, it won't take too long. So after the two share a kiss, Rachel takes off to handle her business. So with that done, Betsy notices that there are more Covenant members there than previously expected. In fact, some of these Covenant members were trying their best to make it to Morgan in order to warn her. But the Strike team was there every step of the way, and managed to stop them. So with the mutant prisoners freed and a few Strike members back at a safe distance, Betsy tells her core that if she is unable to beat Morgan, then they will have to step in. And with those words, Betsy came crashing into the window and attempted to attack the acolytes' minds. But unfortunately, it backfired, and before Betsy could react, they managed to capture her with Blightswell chains. So with Betsy's capture, Morgan walked into the room and told her that she ought to be ashamed of herself. For all Betsy's talks of mutants caring about humans, she is now going to be responsible for bringing war to the people of Britain. Because any minute Doom will have mobilized thousands of Doombots to fly westward and fight on her behalf. So with chaos about to unfold, Morgan tells Betsy to say her last words as we transition over to the Everforge. And when we get there, we see Rachel as well as Brian and Megan bringing a defeated Fury to the Forge Master. And let's just say the Forge Master is not really happy with Morgan Le Fay. Because in his words, Morgan Le Fay reneged on their agreement about giving them a challenging war. Now, this was a mistake that Rachel was more than happy to capitalize on, because to the best of Rachel's knowledge, the Forge wasn't too picky on who they waged war against. The only thing they cared about was if the enemy was powerful or not. So as Doom's forces mobilized and set off to war, they were immediately intercepted by the Furies. And according to the narrator, they were not going to win this battle. So as Doom's forces are dismantled, we transition back to Betsy and Morgan. And Betsy states that the Blight's will may suppress her psychic powers, but it does not suppress her Captain Britain abilities. So with a show of might, Betsy managed to break the bonds that hold her captive. And just like that, Betsy states that the speed and the strength, and most importantly the sword, are all gifts that belong to Captain Britain. So with those words, she activated the Starlight Sword and ran it right into her chest. So just as that was going down, we see Excalibur driven into the earth by Fiza. And out of the bright light emerged Morgan Le Fay, completely transformed by the blade. For now, Excalibur forgave her and linked her to the land again. And just like that, Morgan was able to hear the land of Britain in the most purest form. So following all of that, we transitioned sometime later at the Braddock Academy Interest Fair. And once there, we see Betsy on the phone talking to Tony Stark. And she was filling him in on everything that just transpired, ranging from the Doombots to Morgan becoming attached to the land once again. So with everyone having their happy ending, Brian tells his sister, Betsy, that he is planning on restarting the Braddock's Academy once again. And soon he will have to return to teaching. So with that said, Betsy and Rachel take off into the sky, for the multiverse was calling. So with that said, the final issue of Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain, came to an end. And if you want to continue Rachel's story, consider checking out this video right here in the Fall of X storyline. But anyway, with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.